The blood drained from Jin Sang's face as he stood frozen in the elementary school cafeteria doorway. The man who'd ended rivals with a single phone call, who commanded a billion-dollar criminal empire spanning 3 continents, who'd never flinched at violence or betrayal, stood paralyzed by what he witnessed. His 8-year-old daughter, Zuri, sat alone at the end of a lunch table, her small brown hands trembling as milk dripped from her natural hair. 3 girls stood over her, laughing. And not a single adult moved to help. In that moment, Jin Sang realized the truth. He'd been protecting his daughter from the wrong enemies. The real danger wasn't in the dark underworld he navigated daily. It was here, in the fluorescent-lit halls where he'd thought she was safe. What he discovered next would bring a Mafia kingpin to his knees, and ignite a forbidden love that would change everything. If you love intense Mafia romance, forbidden love stories, and family drama that'll have you on the edge of your seat, you're in the right place. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss our dramatic stories. Drop a comment telling me if you've ever had to fight for someone you love. Now, let's dive into Jin Sang and Zuri's story. Jin Sang Kong didn't do spontaneity. Every move he made was calculated, every decision filtered through layers of strategy and risk assessment. It's how you survived in his world, the world of the Korean-American underworld where he reigned as the untouchable head of the Kong Corporation, a legitimate tech empire that served as the perfect front for the syndicate he truly commanded. But Zuri had changed everything. 8 years ago, he'd found her, a 3-month-old baby girl abandoned at a church in Koreatown, wrapped in a pink blanket with nothing but a note, "Please give her a better life than I can." He should have walked away. A man in his position had no business raising a child, especially one who would make him vulnerable. But when those honey brown eyes had locked onto his, something in his carefully constructed armor cracked. Zuri Kong became his weakness and his greatest strength. The only pure thing in his dark world. Which is why that Tuesday afternoon, canceling a meeting with his underbosses felt right. He'd been distant lately, too many territorial disputes, too much bloodshed requiring his personal attention. Zuri had been quiet at breakfast, her usually bright eyes dimmed, and guilt gnawed at him. Westbrook Preparatory Academy sat in an affluent neighborhood of Los Angeles, its pristine grounds and ivy-covered walls projecting prestige. Jin Sang had paid enough in tuition to fund a small country. Surely his daughter was safe here, thriving, making friends. He was wrong. The cafeteria buzzed with the controlled chaos of elementary lunch hour. Jin Sang stood at the entrance, his 6'2" frame immaculate in a Tom Ford suit, his presence commanding attention even among the chaos of children. His security detail waited outside. This visit was meant to be personal, not intimidating. His dark eyes scanned the room for Zuri, and when he found her, his heart stopped. She sat alone at the far end of a lunch table, her back rigid, her movements careful and small as if trying to make herself invisible. Her beautiful box braids, which she'd excitedly asked their housekeeper Mrs. Choi to help style, were disheveled. But it wasn't her isolation that made Jin Sang's blood run cold. It was the 3 girls standing around her, deliberately knocking their lunch trays so milk splashed onto Zuri's uniform. It was the boy making exaggerated monkey gestures while his friends laughed. It was the way Zuri kept her eyes down, her small hands trembling as she continued eating as if nothing was happening, as if this was normal. As if this was survival. Jin Sang's vision tunneled. In his world, disrespect was answered with swift, brutal consequences. Every instinct screamed at him to intervene, to make these children, and their parents, understand what happened when you hurt what belonged to him. But he couldn't move. Because what froze him wasn't just the bullying. It was the teachers. 2 lunch supervisors stood less than 15 feet away, watching. Their eyes skated over Zuri's table, registered the harassment, and deliberately looked away. One even smiled indulgently at the children tormenting his daughter as if it were harmless play. "Zuri probably doesn't even know what that means," one boy said loudly, pointing at the book she was reading. "My mom says people like her don't test well. Something about genetics." The girl next to him giggled. "My dad says it's weird that her dad is Korean. Like, did he buy her or something?" Jin Sang's hands clenched into fists. In that moment, he understood a violence that transcended his professional brutality. This was primal, paternal, unstoppable. Then he saw her face. Zuri looked up briefly, and Jin Sang saw his daughter's expression, not angry, not confused, but resigned. Accepting. As if she'd heard these things so many times they'd become background noise to her existence. Mr. Kong? The voice shattered his focus. He turned to find a woman standing beside him, mid-30s, dark skin that seemed to glow in the fluorescent lighting, natural hair pulled back in a professional bun, wearing a simple but elegant dress that somehow stood out in this sea of privilege. Her eyes were sharp, assessing, and held something he rarely saw when people looked at him, no fear. I'm Lillian Nandi, she said, extending her hand. I'm the new student counselor. You must be Zuri's father. Jin Sang shook her hand automatically, his mind still processing what he'd witnessed. You're new. Started 2 weeks ago. Lillian's gaze drifted to Zuri's table, and something dark flickered across her features. I've been trying to address certain patterns in this school. Your daughter is exceptional, Mr. Kong. And she deserves better than this. You've noticed? His voice was dangerously quiet. I've documented 17 separate incidents involving Zuri in my short time here. Lillian pulled out a tablet, her fingers moving swiftly. I've submitted reports to Principal Whitmore, recommended interventions, requested meetings. I've been told I'm being overly sensitive and seeing problems where there are just normal childhood interactions. Jin Sang looked at this woman, this stranger who'd shown more care for his daughter in 2 weeks than this institution had in months. Why are you telling me this? Lillian met his eyes directly. Because I know who you are, Mr. Kong. And I'm not afraid of you. She paused. But they should be afraid of what happens when a father discovers his child has been suffering in silence. Before Jin Sang could respond, a commotion erupted at Zuri's table. One of the girls had accidentally knocked Zuri's entire lunch tray onto the floor. Food splattered across her uniform, and the cafeteria erupted in laughter. Zuri stood slowly, her small face carefully blank, and began cleaning up the mess with napkins. Not crying. Not protesting. Just accepting. Jin Sang moved. Silence fell across the cafeteria like a blade. Jin Sang Kang's presence had that effect, cultivated through years of commanding rooms where one wrong word meant death. Children stopped mid-sentence, instinctively recognizing a predator even if they didn't understand what kind. Appa? Zuri's voice was small, shocked. Her eyes widened with something that broke Jin Sang's heart, fear. Not fear of him, but fear that his presence would make things worse for her later. He knelt beside her, ignoring the spilled food, and gently took her small hands in his. Up close, he saw what he'd missed during their rushed mornings, the circles under her eyes, the way she flinched slightly at sudden movements, the defensive set of her small shoulders. You don't have to clean this up, Natal, he said softly, using the Korean endearment. My daughter. This wasn't your fault. It was an accident, Zuri whispered, and Jin Sang heard the script she'd been taught to recite. The lies she'd learned to tell to survive. Mr. Kong. A woman in her 50s bustled over, her smile too bright, too practiced. What a wonderful surprise. We didn't know you'd be visiting today. I'm Mrs. Pritchard, the lunch coordinator. Jin Sang stood slowly, and his full height combined with the coldness in his eyes made Mrs. Pritchard's smile falter. You were standing right there, he said quietly. You watched those children harass my daughter. You did nothing. Oh, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Do I look like I misunderstood what I witnessed? The temperature in the cafeteria seemed to drop. Mrs. Pritchard's face flushed. Children sometimes play rough. We encourage them to work things out independently. She's 8 years old and eating lunch alone while being pelted with food and racial slurs. Jin Sang's voice never rose, but it cut like razors. What exactly should she work out independently about that situation? Lillian appeared at his elbow, addressing the children who'd surrounded Zuri. Ashley, Brandon, Mackenzie, you 3 need to come with me to my office. Now. We didn't do anything. Ashley protested. It was just a joke. Then you can explain the humor to me, Lillian said firmly. And to your parents when I call them. You can't just, Mrs. Pritchard started. I can, and I will. Lillian's voice carried authority. Mr. Kong, why don't you take Zuri to get cleaned up? I'll meet you in my office in 15 minutes. We need to have a serious conversation about what's been happening. Jin Sang wanted to burn the entire building down. Instead, he helped Zuri to her feet and led her out of the cafeteria, hyper-aware of her small hand in his, how she walked close to his side as if he were a shield. In the bathroom, Jin Sang wet paper towels and gently cleaned the food stains from her uniform while Zuri stood silent, tears finally tracking down her cheeks. Why didn't you tell me this was happening? He asked gently. I didn't want to bother you. Her voice was barely audible. You're always so busy with work. And I thought if I was just nicer, if I tried harder to be their friend, it would stop. Jin Sang's heart shattered. He pulled his daughter into his arms, feeling her small body shake with suppressed sobs. Oh, nay Sarang. Nothing you did caused this. Do you understand? This is not your fault. But they say. I don't care what they say. He pulled back to look into her eyes. You are brilliant, beautiful, and strong. You are a Kong. And no one, hurts my family without consequences. Something in his voice must have penetrated because Zuri's tears slowed. What are you going to do, Appa? Jin Sang thought of the various ways he dealt with enemies over the years. None of them were appropriate for an elementary school. I'm going to fix this, he promised. But I need you to tell me everything. Every incident, every word, every person who hurt you or stood by watching. Can you do that? Zuri nodded slowly. Ms. Nandi is nice. She actually listens. Lillian Nandi. The counselor who'd approached him without fear, who documented his daughter's suffering when everyone else had looked away. Interesting. I know you're probably as angry as Jin Sang right now. Trust me, this story gets even more intense. But before we continue, if you're loving this Mafia romance drama, smash that like button and make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. Comment below, #ProtectZuri if you think Jin Sang should take matters into his own hands, or #SystemChange if you think he needs to work within the system. Now, let's see what happens when a Mafia boss meets a fearless counselor. Lillian Nandi's office was small but personal, decorated with artwork celebrating black excellence, shelves lined with books on child psychology and cultural competency, and a small diffuser releasing lavender scent into the air. It was a sanctuary, Jin Sang realized. A safe space in an institution that had proven itself hostile. She sat across from him now, with Zuri between them working on a puzzle Lillian had provided. Jin Sang studied this woman who'd somehow appeared exactly when he needed her. I'm going to be direct, Mr. Kong, Lillian said, pulling out her documentation. Zuri has been systematically bullied since the school year began 4 months ago. The harassment includes racial slurs, physical intimidation, social isolation, and what I believe is implicit bias from several staff members who view her as difficult or too sensitive when she reports incidents. Jin Sang's jaw clenched. Names. I have them all documented. Lillian handed him the tablet. But here's what you need to understand. This isn't just about individual students or even individual teachers. This is systemic. Westbrook Prep talks a good game about diversity, but they've never actually had to practice it. Zuri is one of 3 black students in the entire elementary school, and the only one with an Asian parent. She represents something that makes them uncomfortable, so they've chosen to other her rather than protect her. Then I'll remove her. Transfer her to a school that actually deserves her presence. You could, Lillian agreed. But will that solve the problem? Or will it teach Zuri that when institutions fail her, the answer is to run rather than fight for change? Jin Sang's eyes narrowed. You don't know anything about me, Ms. Nandi. Fighting is what I do. I know exactly who you are, Mr. Kong. Lillian leaned forward, her dark eyes intense. I did my research the day Zuri was enrolled. I know about Kong Corporation. I know about the rumors of your other business interests. I know you're a dangerous man. And yet you're still here. Alone in a room with me. Because I've spent my career fighting for children who can't fight for themselves. Do you think I'm going to stop because their father could make me disappear? She smiled slightly. Besides, you're not going to hurt someone trying to help your daughter. That's not who you are with her. Something shifted in the air between them. Jin Sang had spent decades reading people, identifying weaknesses, exploiting fears. Lillian Nandi showed him none. She met his intensity with her own, matched his protective fury with professional determination. She was magnificent. What do you propose? He asked. I propose we document everything, build an irrefutable case, and force this school to implement real change. But Mr. Kong, she paused, choosing her words carefully, that means doing this the right way. No threats, no intimidation, no making problems disappear the way I'm sure you're accustomed to. This has to be above board. You're asking a wolf to play by sheep rules. I'm asking a father to model for his daughter that power used righteously is more effective than power used ruthlessly. Lillian glanced at Zuri, who was listening while pretending not to. What do you want her to learn from this? Jin Sang followed her gaze. Zuri was watching him with those honey-brown eyes, waiting to see what kind of man her father would be. He thought of his own father, brutal, uncompromising, teaching Jin Sang that mercy was weakness and fear was the only currency that mattered. That legacy had built an empire but destroyed a family. I want her to learn that she's worth fighting for, Jin Sang said quietly. That her voice matters. That she never has to endure silence again. Lillian smiled, a real smile that transformed her entire face. Then we're on the same page. But Mr. Kong, I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Trust. A word that meant nothing in his world, where betrayal was expected and loyalty was purchased. But as he looked at this woman who'd documented his daughter's suffering, who'd stood up to administration on Zuri's behalf, who looked at him without fear but with challenge and respect, Jin Sang found himself wanting to try. Tell me your plan, Ms. Nandi. Call me Lillian, she said. And the first step is a formal meeting with Principal Whitmore. Tomorrow, with everything documented. We're going to make this impossible to dismiss or downplay. And if they still refuse to act? Lillian's smile turned sharp. Then we escalate. I've worked in education for 12 years, Mr. Kong. I know exactly which pressure points to push, which boards to notify, which media outlets love stories about prestigious schools failing minority students. Jin Sang found himself smiling back, a real smile, rare and genuine. You're quite strategic, Lillian. I learned from the best. She stood, extending her hand again. My father was a community organizer. He taught me that the best fights are won before the battle even begins. Jin Sang took her hand, holding it perhaps a moment longer than professional. He noticed she didn't pull away immediately either. Appa? Zuri's small voice broke the moment. Is Ms. Nandi going to help us? Yes, sweetheart, Jin Sang said, his eyes still on Lillian. I believe she is. Principal Margaret Whitmore was a woman who'd built a career on maintaining appearances. Westbrook Prep's reputation was pristine, its donor base wealthy and influential, its test scores impeccable. She did not appreciate disruptions to that carefully maintained image. Jin Sang Kong sitting in her office definitely qualified as a disruption. Mr. Kong, I assure you we take all concerns about student welfare seriously, Whitmore said, her smile tight. She was 50-something, blonde hair in a perfect bob, wearing pearls that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. But I think there may be some misunderstanding about what you witnessed yesterday. Enlighten me, Jin Sang said, his voice dangerously soft. He sat in her visitor's chair like it was a throne, radiating controlled menace. Explain how I misunderstood watching my daughter be pelted with food while your staff did nothing. Lillian sat beside him, tablet ready, expression professional. Principal Whitmore, I've documented 17 separate incidents over the past 2 weeks. That's in addition to the 6 complaints Mrs. Choi called in earlier this semester that were dismissed. Mrs. Choi is the housekeeper, correct? Whitmore's tone suggested this invalidated the reports. Not actually a parent. Mrs. Choi is Zuri's primary caregiver when I'm working, Jin Sang said coldly. Her concerns are valid. Of course, of course. Whitmore shuffled papers on her desk. But you must understand, Mr. Kong, children can sometimes be overly sensitive. Especially children who are adjusting to environments where they're different from their peers. The temperature in the room dropped. Different, Jean Sang repeated. Explain what you mean by different. Whitmore had the grace to look uncomfortable. Well, culturally. Socially. Zuri is a lovely child, but she is one of our few minority students, and your solution to that is to allow her to be bullied until she either conforms or leaves? Lillian's voice cut through like a scalpel. That's your educational philosophy? Ms. Nandi, you're new here, so perhaps you don't understand how we handle these situations. We encourage resilience, independence. You encourage black and brown children to endure racism silently, Lillian corrected. There's a difference. Whitmore's face flushed. I resent that implication. Then explain to me why Zuri has submitted 5 separate complaints this semester, all documented, and nothing has been done. Lillian pulled up her tablet. September 15th, told her hair looked like worms, by 3 students. Your response, children are curious about differences. October 3rd, excluded from a birthday party she was initially invited to after parents learned about the Kong family. Your response, we can't control private social events. October 24th, called a racial slur on the playground. Your response, the child probably didn't understand what they were saying. Should I continue? Lillian asked. Because I have 11 more documented incidents where your response was to minimize, dismiss, or blame Zuri for being too sensitive. Jean Sang watched Whitmore's face cycle through emotions, defensiveness, irritation, calculation. He recognized the look. She was weighing options, deciding how much resistance she could mount against a parent with his resources. Mr. Kong, Whitmore said finally, trying a different approach. I understand you're upset. As a parent, that's natural. But we have procedures for handling these situations. We can't just. Your procedures have failed my daughter for 4 months, Jean Sang interrupted. So here are my terms. You will implement mandatory anti-bullying training for all staff within 2 weeks. You will institute a zero-tolerance policy for racial harassment. You will assign a dedicated counselor, he nodded toward Lillian, to monitor Zuri's integration and well-being. And you will personally call the parents of every child involved in yesterday's incident and explain what consequences their children will face. Mr. Kong, I hardly think. I'm not finished. Jean Sang leaned forward slightly. You will also institute monthly oversight meetings where parents of minority students can voice concerns directly to administration. And you will hire a diversity and inclusion coordinator whose job is to ensure this never happens to another child. Whitmore's mouth opened and closed. Those demands are completely unreasonable. The board would never approve. Then I'll take this to the board myself. Jean Sang stood smoothly. And to the media. And to every parent at this school. I'm sure they'd be very interested to learn how their tuition dollars are funding an institution that protects bullies and punishes victims. Are you threatening me, Mr. Kong? I don't make threats, Principal Whitmore. Jean Sang's smile was cold. I make promises. And I promise you, either this school changes, or I will ensure everyone knows exactly what kind of environment you've created here. He turned to leave, Lillian gathering her materials to follow. They were at the door when Whitmore's voice stopped them. You can't just come in here and demand we restructure our entire approach because your daughter is having trouble making friends. Jean Sang turned slowly. My daughter was eating lunch alone while children threw food at her and called her racial slurs. Your staff watched and did nothing. If you think that's acceptable, then this institution is more broken than I realized. She's probably exaggerating. Are you calling my daughter a liar? The question hung in the air like a blade. Whitmore seemed to realize she'd crossed a line. No, I just meant. You meant that a black child's experience of racism is inherently questionable. That her pain is subject to your interpretation and approval. Jean Sang stepped closer. Let me be very clear, Principal Whitmore. Zuri is 8 years old. She should be worried about math homework and playground games, not survival strategies for daily racism. The fact that you can't see that as a catastrophic failure tells me everything I need to know about your leadership. He left without waiting for a response, Lillian close behind. They didn't speak until they were outside, the California sun bright after the oppressive atmosphere of Whitmore's office. That went well, Lillian said dryly. Jean Sang glanced at her, surprised to find amusement in her expression. You're not concerned? Concerned? Mr. Kong, you just did something most parents don't have the courage or resources to do. You demanded accountability. She smiled. Though I will note, you have a very intense negotiating style. I find intensity yields results. In your usual business, I'm sure it does. Lillian tilted her head, studying him. But this is different. Whitmore will likely dig in her heels now, see this as a power struggle she can't afford to lose. Then what do you suggest? We go over her head. District board meeting is next week. We present everything there, publicly, with full documentation. Lillian's eyes gleamed with strategic fire. We make this about systemic change, not just one principal's failures. Harder to dismiss, easier to gain support. Jean Sang found himself fascinated by her tactical mind. You've done this before. 3 times. One twice, and the third time led to a superintendent's resignation, so I count that as a win too. She checked her watch. I need to get back to work, but Mr. Kong, Jean Sang, if I may? Yes. Zuri told me something yesterday. She said she prays every night to be strong enough for school the next day. Lillian's expression softened with pain. An 8-year-old shouldn't need that kind of courage just to get through a school day. So whatever we need to do to change this, I'm with you. All the way. Jean Sang felt something shift in his chest, an unfamiliar warmth spreading through his usually cold tactical mind. Why are you doing this? You barely know us. Because I was that little girl once, Lillian said quietly. Brilliant, black, and alone in spaces that didn't want me. And I didn't have anyone fighting for me. I won't let history repeat itself with Zuri if I can help it. Before Jean Sang could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and frowned. I have to go. Work issue. Of course. Lillian started to leave, then paused. Jean Sang? Be careful. Whatever work issue you're dealing with, Zuri needs her father. Don't do anything that might take you away from her. She walked away before he could ask what she meant, leaving Jean Sang standing in the parking lot wondering how this woman he'd known for barely 24 hours could already read him so accurately. His phone buzzed again. The message was from his second-in-command, Yoon, we have a problem. The Chong family is moving on our territory. Need you at the warehouse. Jean Sang looked up at the school building where his daughter sat in a classroom, trying to learn while carrying the weight of daily cruelty. Then at his phone, where his other life, the violent, unforgiving world of gang politics, demanded his attention. For the first time in his life, Jean Sang Kong wasn't sure which battlefield he was better equipped to fight on. The warehouse in Koreatown was tense with armed men when Jean Sang arrived. His inner circle stood around a table where a bloodied man knelt, one of the Chong family's lieutenants, caught trying to intimidate one of Jean Sang's legitimate business owners. Hyeongnam, Yoon greeted him, using the respectful term for an older brother in the organization. He was at Kim's restaurant, demanding protection money. Said the Chong family was taking over this territory now that you're distracted. Jean Sang's expression didn't change, but everyone in the room felt the shift in atmosphere. He approached the kneeling man slowly, each step deliberate. Distracted, Jean Sang repeated softly. Is that what Park Chong thinks? That because I'm handling personal matters, I've grown weak? The lieutenant, barely 25, trying to prove himself, sneered despite his split lip. Everyone knows you've gone soft since you got that kid. The Dragon of Los Angeles, neutered by an 8-year-old. The man's words cut off as Jean Sang grabbed him by the throat, lifting him effortlessly. For a moment, the mask of the concerned father disappeared, replaced by the ruthless enforcer who'd built his empire on fear. You will deliver a message to Park Chong, Jean Sang said, his voice devoid of emotion. My daughter is not weakness. She is the only reason I still follow any rules at all. The only reason I don't burn his entire operation to the ground for this disrespect. Tell him to be grateful she's taught me restraint. He released the man, who collapsed, gasping. Tell him if he moves on my territory again, he'll discover exactly how dangerous a protective father can be. Now get out of my sight. The lieutenant scrambled away. Jin Sang turned to his men, who were watching with a mixture of respect and wariness. Double security on all our operations, he ordered. The Chong family is testing boundaries. Show them why that's a fatal mistake. But, he paused, his voice hardening, no civilian casualties. No collateral damage. We're not animals. Yoon raised an eyebrow slightly. That last order was new. The old Jin Sang hadn't cared about collateral damage. But Yoon simply nodded. Understood, Hyungnam. Jin Sang's phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Choi, Zuri asking when you'll be home. She wants to show you something from school. Guilt twisted in his chest. This was his reality, split between the daughter who needed him to be better and the empire that demanded he be ruthless. Yoon, you handle the rest. I'm going home. Hyungnam, we need to plan the response. You have your orders. Execute them. Jin Sang was already walking toward the door. My daughter is waiting. Behind him, his men exchanged glances. The dragon was changing, and they weren't sure if that made him more dangerous or more vulnerable. At home, Jin Sang found Zuri at the Kitchoi table with Mrs. Choi, working on homework. She looked up when he entered, her face brightening in a way that made his heart ache. Appa. You came home. I promised, didn't I? He kissed the top of her head, noting the paperwork spread before her. What are you working on? Ms. Nandi said I should write about someone brave I know. Zuri held up her paper proudly. I'm writing about you. Jin Sang froze. He thought of where he'd just been, what he'd just done. Zuri, I'm not sure I'm the right choice. But you are. She insisted. You came to my school even though I know you were busy. You stood up to the principal for me. Ms. Nandi says that's what brave people do, they protect others even when it's hard. Jin Sang crouched beside her chair, looking into those trusting eyes. What else did Ms. Nandi say? She said that real strength isn't about being scary or powerful. It's about using whatever power you have to help people who can't help themselves. Zuri tilted her head. That's what you do, right? At your company? Mrs. Choi, wisely, suddenly became very interested in preparing dinner. It's complicated, Natal, Jin Sang said carefully. But I'm trying to be the person you see when you look at me. You already are, Appa. Zuri hugged him suddenly, fiercely. You're the bravest person I know. Over her head, Jin Sang caught Mrs. Choi's knowing look. The older woman had been with him for 15 years, had watched him transform from a violent young enforcer to the man he was now. She knew all his secrets, all his sins. Mr. Kong, she said softly in Korean, the counselor, Ms. Nandi, she called earlier. She wants to meet with you tomorrow to discuss the board presentation. I told her you'd call back. Jin Sang nodded, then paused. Mrs. Choi, in all your calls to the school this semester about Zuri, did anyone ever take you seriously? The older woman's expression darkened. They treated me like I was overreacting. One administrator even suggested that perhaps I was not understanding American childhood dynamics because I'm Korean. She snorted. I raised 4 children here. I understand perfectly. They simply didn't want to listen. Another failure. More adults who'd watched Zuri suffer and chosen comfort over action. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a number he didn't recognize. He answered cautiously. Mr. Kong? This is Lillian Nandi. I hope I'm not interrupting. Jin Sang stepped into his home office, closing the door. Not at all. Mrs. Choi said you called. I wanted to update you on tomorrow's meeting with the district board. I've prepared a comprehensive presentation, but I need you to understand, these people are politicians. They care about optics, about liability, about keeping donors happy. So we give them what they care about. Jin Sang's strategic mind engaged. Threaten their reputation, their funding, their legal standing. Exactly. But, Jean sang, she paused, and he found he liked how his name sounded in her voice. We need to be smart about this. Not aggressive. Passionate, yes. Demanding, absolutely. But if you come in like you did with Whitmore, they'll dismiss you as an overprotective parent with too much money and influence. You're saying I need to be less myself. I'm saying you need to channel your intensity into strategy rather than intimidation. He heard rustling papers through the phone. I've seen men like you before, Jean sang. Men who command respect through fear. But this situation requires something different. It requires vulnerability. Showing them what this has cost Zuri emotionally, what it's cost you as a father. I don't do vulnerability, Lillian. Then learn. Her voice was gentle but firm. Because that's what's going to reach them. Not threats, truth. Raw, honest truth about a little girl who prays every night for strength to face her school. That's what creates change. Jean sang was quiet, processing. In his world, vulnerability was death. Showing weakness invited attacks, betrayals, exploitation. But Lillian wasn't asking him to show weakness. She was asking him to show humanity. Will you be there? He asked. At the meeting? Of course. We're in this together. Together, he repeated, and the word felt foreign but right. Lillian, can I ask why you're investing so much in this? You could easily stay neutral, not risk your new position. Because I've spent my entire career watching children like Zuri slip through the cracks, she said quietly. Brilliant, beautiful black and brown children whose light gets dimmed by systems that don't value them. I became a counselor to stop that. To be the person I needed when I was young. Someone hurt you. It wasn't a question. Yes. And no one fought for me. So now I fight for others. She paused. Tomorrow, Jean sang. Let me see the father, not the CEO. Not the, another pause, careful, not whatever else you are in your business dealings. Just the man who loves his daughter enough to demand the world treat her with dignity. After they hung up, Jean sang sat in his office, staring at the photo on his desk, him and Zuri at her last birthday, both smiling, her wearing a princess crown he'd bought her from the most expensive toy store in LA. He'd killed men. Destroyed lives. Built an empire on violence and fear. Could he really transform into someone who fought with vulnerability instead of force? His door opened quietly. Zuri peeked in, holding her paper. Appa? I finished my essay. Do you want to read it? Jean sang held out his hand, and she climbed into his lap like when she was smaller, fitting perfectly against his chest. He read her words, childish handwriting describing him as brave, strong, and kind. Describing how safe she felt when he was near. Describing how he made the scary things less scary. By the time he finished, Jean sang's vision was blurry. This is beautiful, Natal, he managed. Ms. Nandi helped me with some of the spelling, Zuri admitted. Appa, do you think tomorrow the board will listen? Will they make school better? Jean sang thought of the meeting ahead, of Lillian's advice, of the choice before him, be the ruthless enforcer or the vulnerable father. I don't know, he admitted honestly. But I promise I'll do everything I can to make them listen. You deserve to feel safe at school, Zuri. You deserve to be happy. I'm happy when I'm with you, she said simply. Later that night, after putting Zuri to bed, Jean sang stood in his home gym, pounding the heavy bag until his knuckles bled, trying to reconcile the man he'd been with the man he needed to become. His phone lit up with a message from Lillian. Zuri showed me her essay about you today. She sees the best in you, Jean sang. Tomorrow, show the board why she's right to believe in you. Jean sang stared at the message for a long time, then typed back, thank you. For seeing us. For fighting for her. The response came quickly, I'm fighting for both of you. See you tomorrow. Jean sang set down his phone and looked at his reflection in the gym mirror, bruised knuckles, expensive suit discarded, the weight of two worlds on his shoulders. Tomorrow, he would have to be someone new. Someone who fought without fists, who commanded without fear, who led with truth instead of threats. For Zuri, he would find a way. And maybe, a small voice whispered in his mind, for the fierce counselor who'd looked at him without fear and seen something worth believing in. The district board met in a converted auditorium, all polished wood and harsh fluorescent lighting designed to intimidate. Jean Sang sat in the audience section with Lillian beside him, her presence grounding him in a way he didn't fully understand. "Breathe," she whispered as their agenda item approached. "Remember, father first, CEO second." Jean Sang nodded, but his hands were clenched into fists. Around them, parents filled the seats. Lillian had quietly mobilized several families with similar complaints, building a coalition rather than a solo attack. Next item, the board president announced, a stern woman named Dr. Patricia Simmons. Concerns regarding student welfare at Westbrook Preparatory Academy. Mr. Jean Sang Kong and Ms. Lillian Nandi will present. They approached the podium together. Lillian set up her tablet to display on the large screen, pulling up documentation while Jean Sang stood beside her, feeling exposed in a way that had nothing to do with physical danger. "Good evening," Lillian began, her voice clear and professional. "I'm Lillian Nandi, student counselor at Westbrook Prep. I'm here tonight with Mr. Kong to present evidence of systematic failures in protecting minority students from racial harassment and bullying." The screen filled with data, incident reports, complaint logs, email chains showing dismissive responses from administration. Lillian walked through each one methodically, building an irrefutable case. Then she paused. "But data doesn't tell the whole story. Mr. Kong, would you like to share your daughter's experience?" Jean Sang stepped forward, and for a moment, every instinct screamed at him to intimidate, to threaten, to force compliance. Instead, he thought of Zuri's essay. Of her trust. Of Lillian's faith in him. "My daughter Zuri is 8 years old," he began, his voice quieter than usual. 4 months ago, she started at Westbrook Prep. She was excited. She'd picked out her backpack, practiced her introduction, talked about making new friends. He pulled out his phone, displaying a photo of Zuri on that first day, beaming at the camera. 3 weeks later, she stopped smiling. She became quiet. Careful. I thought she was just adjusting. I was busy with work, too busy to see what was really happening. Jean Sang's throat tightened. "Last Tuesday, I surprised her at lunch. I watched my daughter sit alone while children threw food at her. Called her names. Made racist gestures. And I watched school staff see it happen and do nothing." He looked up at the board members and let them see his pain, his fury, his desperation. "That night, I checked on Zuri before bed. She was praying, asking God to make her strong enough to face school the next day. An 8-year-old, begging for strength to survive her education." Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Dr. Simmons' expression had softened slightly. "I came here tonight not to threaten or demand," Jean Sang continued. "I came to ask, how many other children are suffering in silence? How many parents don't have my resources to fight back? How many brilliant, beautiful children are being crushed by an institution that's supposed to nurture them?" He took a breath, steadying himself. "My daughter is Black and Korean. She exists at intersections this school has never had to accommodate before. But she deserves better than being treated like a problem to be managed. She deserves to thrive." Lillian stepped beside him, her shoulder brushing his in silent support. "We're not asking for special treatment," she said. "We're demanding basic human dignity. And we're asking this board to hold Westbrook Prep accountable for systematic failures that have harmed multiple students." "We have additional families here tonight," Jean Sang added, gesturing to the audience. "All with similar stories. All dismissed, minimized, told their children were too sensitive or needed to toughen up." One by one, parents stood, sharing stories of racist comments ignored, cultural insensitivity excused, complaints buried. The testimonies painted a damning picture. Dr. Simmons called for a brief recess. When they reconvened, her expression was grim. "Mr. Kong, Ms. Nandi, and the families who testified tonight, thank you for your courage in bringing these matters to our attention. The board takes these allegations extremely seriously." "Allegations?" Jean Sang's voice hardened. "With all due respect, Dr. Simmons, we've provided documentation. Lillian's hand on his arm stopped him. She stepped forward smoothly. Dr. Simmons, what specific actions will the board take to investigate these documented incidents and prevent future occurrences? We will launch a comprehensive review of Westbrook Prep's policies and practices, Dr. Simmons announced. Including mandatory training for all staff, revised incident reporting procedures, and quarterly oversight meetings. Principal Whitmore will be placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Jean Sang felt Lillian's hand squeeze his arm in victory. Additionally, Dr. Simmons continued, we will be hiring a district-wide director of equity and inclusion, and establishing a parent advisory board to ensure ongoing accountability. Timeline? Lillian asked. Training begins within 2 weeks. Full policy review completed within 60 days. Director hired within 90 days. It was more than Jean Sang had expected, but he still felt the rage simmering. And consequences for the staff who witnessed my daughter's harassment and did nothing? That will be addressed in the investigation, Dr. Simmons said carefully. I understand your frustration, Mr. Kong. But we must follow proper procedures. Jean Sang started to argue, but Lillian's voice cut in. We appreciate the board's commitment to addressing these issues. We'll be watching closely to ensure these promises become actions. Outside afterward, Jean Sang rounded on her. They're going to drag their feet. Investigations, procedures, it's all bureaucratic stalling. Maybe, Lillian agreed. But it's also more than most parents ever get. And now we have it on record, publicly, with witnesses. They can't sweep this under the rug. Jean Sang ran a hand through his hair, frustration radiating off him. I want immediate justice. I want everyone who hurt Zuri to face consequences now. I know. Lillian's voice was gentle. But this is how systemic change works. It's slow, frustrating, and never feels like enough. But it's what will protect not just Zuri, but every child who comes after her. You're asking me to be patient. I'm asking you to trust the process. And me. She stepped closer, looking up at him. You did beautifully in there, Jean Sang. You showed them your humanity, your love for Zuri. That's what moved them. They stood in the parking lot, the California night warm around them, and Jean Sang became acutely aware of how close Lillian was, how her eyes reflected the streetlights, how his heart was racing in a way that had nothing to do with confrontation. I couldn't have done this without you, he said quietly. Yes, you could have. But I'm glad you didn't have to. Lillian smiled. Your daughter is lucky to have you fighting for her. She likes you, Jean Sang said. Zuri. She talks about you constantly. Says you're the only teacher who really listens. She's an incredible kid. Brilliant, creative, resilient beyond her years. Lillian's expression turned sad. She shouldn't have to be this resilient. No child should. You care about her. I care about all my students. But the way Lillian said it, the way she looked at him, suggested this was becoming more than professional concern. Jean Sang should have stepped back, maintained distance. Getting close to people was dangerous in his line of work. But Lillian wasn't just any person. She was fierce and fearless, strategic and compassionate, everything he'd never known he needed. Lillian. His phone rang. Yoon's number. Jean Sang cursed softly, then answered. What? Hyungnam, we have a situation. The Chong family hit one of our warehouses. 3 men injured, significant products stolen. Jean Sang's expression went cold. I'm on my way. He hung up, torn between 2 worlds again. Lillian was watching him with an unreadable expression. You have to go, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Jean Sang, she hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. I told you I know who you are. What you are. And I need you to understand something. He waited, tense. I don't judge you for the life you lead, Lillian said carefully. I don't know your full story, what brought you to where you are. But I need to know, are you trying to be better? For Zuri? Every day, Jean Sang admitted. Every single day, I try to be the father she deserves instead of the monster I was raised to be. Lillian nodded slowly. Then that's enough. But Jin sang, whatever you're about to do tonight, ask yourself, would you want Zuri to know about it? Would you want her to see it? She left before he could respond, walking to her car with the same confidence she'd shown in the board meeting. Jin sang stood there, watching her go, her words echoing in his mind. Would you want Zuri to know about it? His phone buzzed again. Yoon, demanding his presence, his leadership, his ruthlessness. Jin sang looked up at the stars barely visible through LA's light pollution, and made a choice that would change everything. He called Yoon back. Handle it. Non-lethal response, no civilian exposure, minimal damage. Send the message but don't start a war. Hyungnam, this kind of disrespect requires. It requires exactly what I just ordered, Jin sang cut him off. I trust you to execute this appropriately. I'm going home to my daughter. He hung up before Yoon could argue. For the first time in 20 years of running the Korean underworld in Los Angeles, Jin Sang-kang chose family over empire. And it terrified him almost as much as it freed him. 3 months later. Westbrook Prep Spring Assembly looked different now. The stage featured artwork from students of all backgrounds. The program included performances celebrating multiple cultures. And in the front row, Zuri Kang sat between two friends, real friends who'd reached out after the administration changes began, smiling genuinely for the first time in months. Jin Sang watched from the parents section, feeling something unfamiliar warm his chest. Pride. Peace. Hope. She looks happy, Lillian said, sliding into the seat beside him. Because of you, Jin Sang replied. Because of both of us. And because she's stronger than either of us realized. Lillian smiled at Zuri, who'd spotted them and was waving excitedly. The new principal starts next week. She has a background in equity and inclusion. I'm cautiously optimistic. You're always cautious. And you're learning to be. Lillian's tone was teasing. I heard you've been meeting with community leaders about reforming your business practices. Legitimate ventures only, or so the rumors say. Jin Sang glanced at her. You have interesting sources. I pay attention. She met his eyes directly. Are the rumors true? I'm transitioning, Jin Sang admitted. It's complicated and dangerous and will take time. But yes. I'm trying to build something Zuri can be proud of instead of something she'll have to escape from. That's brave. That's terrifying, he corrected. My whole organization is in flux. Allies are questioning my leadership. Enemies smell weakness. But you're doing it anyway. For her. Jin Sang nodded toward Zuri. And for. He stopped himself, but Lillian's knowing smile suggested she'd heard what he didn't say. For you. Over the past 3 months, their collaboration on Westbrook's reforms had evolved into something neither could fully name. Dinners to discuss Zuri's progress that stretched into conversations about everything else. Late-night calls about policy changes that became confessions of dreams and fears. Moments when their hands would brush and neither would pull away. Jin Sang was falling for Lillian Nandi, and it was perhaps the most dangerous thing he'd ever done. Jin Sang, Lillian said quietly, her voice carrying weight, what are we doing? I don't know, he admitted. But I know I can't stop. You've changed everything, how I see the world, how I see myself, what I want my life to be. I'm a school counselor with student loans and a studio apartment, she said, but her eyes were soft. You're a man trying to be better, he interrupted. A father learning to fight without fists. Someone who wants to deserve the way you look at him. The assembly started before Lillian could respond, but her hand found his in the darkened auditorium, fingers intertwining like a promise. On stage, Zuri stood with her class to perform a song about kindness and inclusion. Her voice was clear and confident, her smile bright, and when she looked at her father in the audience, Jin Sang saw what he'd been fighting for all along. Not just safety. Not just justice. But the chance for his daughter to simply be a child, joyful, curious, unburned. After the assembly, as parents mingled and children played, Jin Sang found himself surrounded by families who testified at the board meeting. They'd formed a coalition, meeting monthly to ensure the school's promised changes actually materialized. "Mr. Kong," one mother said, "I wanted to thank you. Because you spoke up, my son finally told me about the harassment he'd been facing. We're working through it now, but at least it's not invisible anymore." More parents shared similar stories. Jin Sang accepted their gratitude, uncomfortable with being seen as a hero when he felt like anything but. Zuri ran over, breathless and happy. "Appa. Did you see? I sang the solo part. You were magnificent, Natal." He lifted her into his arms despite her protests that she was too big for that now. "I'm so proud of you." "Ms. Nandi said I was brave," Zuri reported. "She said speaking up about what happened helped other kids too." "Is that true?" "Very true," Jin Sang confirmed. "Your courage changed everything." "Our courage," Zuri corrected, then spotted her friends calling her to play. "Can I go?" "We're going to the playground." Jin Sang set her down, watching her run off with the confidence of a child who finally felt safe in her environment. "She's really okay," Lillian said, appearing at his side again. "You did that." "We did that," he corrected, echoing Zuri's words. They stood together, watching the children play, and Jin Sang felt the weight of his double life pressing down. He was changing, yes, but he couldn't transform overnight. There were still dangerous elements, still enemies, still the constant threat of his past consuming his present. "Lillian, there's something you need to know," he started, then stopped. "How did you explain to someone that loving you might put them in danger? That your enemies would see them as leverage? That caring about you was a risk most people couldn't afford to take?" "I know, Jin Sang," she said softly. "I know who you are, what risks come with being close to you. I've known from the beginning. And you're still here." "I'm still here." She turned to face him fully. "Because I see who you're becoming, not just who you were. Because your daughter deserves both her father and her counselor to fight for her. And because..." She paused, vulnerability flickering across her face. "Because?" Jin Sang prompted, his heart racing. "Because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the day we met," Lillian admitted. "And I've tried, believe me. You're complicated and dangerous and everything I should avoid. But I can't. I don't want to." Jin Sang cupped her face gently with one hand, mindful of the parents and children around them but unable to resist the pull any longer. "I don't deserve you," he said quietly. "But I want to try. I want to be someone who does." "Then keep trying," Lillian whispered. "Keep becoming. And let me be part of that journey." Behind them, Zuri's laughter rang out across the playground, pure and joyful and free. Jin Sang Kong had spent his life fighting, for power, for survival, for dominance. But watching his daughter play while the woman he was falling for stood beside him, he realized the most important fight was the one to be worthy of this moment. The battle wasn't over. The Chong family still posed threats. His organization still demanded attention. The school's changes were fragile and would require constant vigilance. But for the first time in his life, Jin Sang Kong wasn't fighting alone. And that made all the difference. Thank you so much for watching. What did you think? Is Jin Sang making the right choice? Can a mafia boss really change for love and family? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you're obsessed with this story, smash that like button, subscribe for more intense Afro-Korean romance dramas, and hit the notification bell. Check out our playlist for similar mafia romance stories. Until next time, remember, sometimes the most dangerous battles are fought with love, not violence. See you in the next video.